This week, we've got a security operations special. Both interviews will focus on how AI technologies are evolving the Security Operations Center through the perspectives from each, though the perspectives from each interview will differ. First, we'll speak to Greg Notch, the CISO at Expel. His perspective comes both from his role as a CISO and Expel as a company that sells managed SOC services. Then Edward Wu from Dropzone AI will talk about the perspective from the perspective of a founder building a product to help organizations increase SOC efficiency. Finally, in the enterprise security news, identity security gets more funding. Wiz walks away. Black Hat announces startup spotlight finalists. CrowdStrike postmortem is out. Simple security tricks are the best security tricks. Splitting the CISO role. Web scraping for AI is out of control. SEC versus SolarWinds, and vaping the internet. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Graylog elevates enterprise-level cybersecurity through its comprehensive SIEM, centralized log management, and API security solutions. Built on the Graylog platform, Graylog Security combines SIEM, security analytics, threat detection, and incident response capabilities. Unlike traditional SIEMs, which offer complex and costly setups, Graylog Security simplifies security and operational challenges with an optimal blend of licensing, people, and infrastructure costs. To see a demo, visit securityweekly.com/Graylog. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Refreshment Day. This is episode 369, recorded on Thursday, July 25th, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Admiral of Agentless, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler-Santullo. How you doing, Katie?
I am well. What is your refreshment of choice these days, Adrian?
Agua sem gas.
Okay, there you go.
It's just
very basic.
Still water today. Yeah, that's how you have to order it here in Brazil. It's either com gas or sem gas, and I don't want to be belching through this podcast, so I chose.
Okay, well, that's
without.
Very polite. We definitely appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, lots of good beverages here, though. Caipirinhas, I've had several of those already. I have not had a Brazilian limeade yet, though I hear they're very good. They're almost like a milkshake. They make them with dairy. Agua de coco is amazing. Generally, there's no reason to have a plastic bottle full of water. This is just what the restaurant had. Most places will just have coconuts and just chop the top off and give you a straw. And that's my favorite way to keep hydrated here. And then suco de caju, also one of my favorites, cashew juice. So not juice made from cashews, so it's not like almond milk or something like that, but juice made from the fruit that we're probably less familiar with in the U.S. rather than the nuts which are on top of the fruit. All right. Either of you have beverages
Doesn't sound like
right now?
a bad way to spend an afternoon.
Yeah.
Green tea.
Just some water.
Agua. Yeah, if Tyler was here, he'd probably have a bourbon or something like that. He'd have a story around where the bourbon came from. We do not have Tyler this week, unfortunately, though. He's I'm not sure what stuff he's dealing with. He said he'd tell us later, but stuff happens sometimes. Quick announcement, and we'll jump into the first interview. We're always looking for great guests like Greg for all the Security Weekly shows. Submit your suggestions by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. And I think that's where Greg originally came from, was the form submission. Or if you ever see me at a conference or something like that, and you've got a good pitch for an interview, you can always hit me up there. It's not just the form that we select guests from. So today's topic is AI's impact on the evolution of the SOC. We're excited to have Greg Notch, CISO, CISO, and CISO, all the CISO pronunciations at Expel with us today. Before Expel, Greg was the CISO and SVP of technology for the National Hockey League, which had to have been interesting. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, and it's in your bio. There's a mention of the different pronunciations of CISO, so that's the reason I did that. I didn't know if that was you that put that together.
Yeah, there's a lot of opinions about how to pronounce that.
Yeah,
they're all wrong.
It's CISO.
CISO, yes.
CISO. I left that one out. That was another possibility. So, in the cybersecurity space, particularly, now we're two RSAs in where the only, the major topic is AI. It feels like the only topic almost, and it seems like everyone's kind of gravitated towards the SOC for their generative AI use cases. I think I've counted something like just shy of 30 companies just combining AI and doing something for the SOC at this point. So there's some high hopes here. So that's really what we want to dig into today is how much of that is hype? What can you actually do with it? And just AI in general, not just generative AI, but the different kinds of AI and how they can help here. So where should we start here? Let's start with
You want to start with what's real or not?
Yeah, us just kind of level set on the SOC because we hear a lot about SOCs and
Okay.
different tiers of the SOC. So just walk us through why we have SOCs and what all the tiers are for there, or whether they're even important. Because I know you guys do things a little bit differently in terms of tiers.
All right, sure. Here's a SOC in 30 seconds. It When you have a security program, you generally buy a lot of security tools. They generally fall into three categories. They're either doing prevention, response, or detection. They broadly, all security technologies fall into those three things. And so these tools generate a lot of alerts and data and things that need to be looked into. And then, in the old days, they were very noisy. They would generate quite a lot of things that were low value, but you still needed to check them out. Things have gotten better, but there's still a human element of needing to look perhaps at more than one tool to understand what's happening in your environment. And then to make sense of, is this an incident? Is this something that's happening in my environment, or is it just noise? And often that data is dumped into a SIM. Sometimes people are using the tools directly, like CrowdStrike or something else. But those tools all require someone to manage. And so traditionally, you'd have a security operations center that was triaging a queue of alerts from various security technologies. And you'd have levels within the SOC. So you'd have sort of your lowest level analyst, handling stuff that they knew is bad, and then stuff they weren't sure about, they would hand to a tier 2 analyst. Something that required, deep investigation might get handed to yet another level of the SOC, and perhaps off to your IR team if it was really an incident. And so, I think broadly SOCs have always been about getting the easiest work to the least expensive or the most junior resources, and then sort of protecting your most senior resources and your most skilled labor to do the most difficult investigations and triage. And so obviously, just like network operation centers or web operation centers from days of yore, the opportunities for automation first are legion. You wanna make this as easy as possible. You would like to automate the data collection. You'd like to automate as much of the determination if something is bad or not as you possibly can. But of course, that's played against attackers who know this and are constantly evolving their techniques and using new exploits and using new attack surfaces to attack your environment. So it the the automation, what you don't want to have it do is automate away the things where you automate away your ability to detect something that's actually going wrong in your environment.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. And with that automation, I think a lot of people think that's where somehow generative AI is going to be used. So I think with AI being such an overloaded term at this point, like that's the next kind of foundational piece that we need to dive into and break down a little bit.
Sure. So like the first sets of automation were, people writing scripts in their sim. I think that became a product category probably, I guess it's like 8 or 9 years ago, called SOAR, where you would wire this thing up to your security tooling and you would script or enrichment or other activities. The promise of generative AI is, sort of twofold. One is a lot of what the SOC does after it's made a determination is explain what happened. So if there is an incident or there wasn't an incident, there's a lot of sort of explainability that's happening there. And that's particularly true if you actually outsource your SOC. You want to make sure that they're actually you actually understand what they're doing on your behalf. The other thing is a lot of this work is really pattern matching, and looking for slight variations of patterns that exist either in the security tooling or in the data or in in the logs that is present. And like that seems like exactly the kind of task that generative AI would be good at. Like, look at this pile of data and help me find the commonalities in it is right in the sweet spot of that. Further, and I think this is where it turns into a little more science fiction, is it should be able to watch a really good SOC analyst work and learn from their behavior and then reapply that to the same sets of technologies. That part's, I think that's still a little forward looking, but those are sort of the
Mhm.
three opportunities I see for it.
Right, and that's the part that's kind of controversial at the moment. Where do you get your training data from? How do you train it? Certainly, there's MSSPs that have their own detection engineers, but then companies underneath them also have detection engineers. So I wonder how much that gets worked into, like, maybe the pricing model is cheaper if you let us train on your data, right? So we can, maybe train some LLM, create some LLMs specifically just for this kind of work, which we're starting to see
Sure.
now.
I 100%. And I think that's a very interesting question, is where you get the training data. Look, if you're CrowdStrike or Palo Alto, where that offer a suite of security tools, and you have a pile of data from a pile of customers, like, you already have training data.
Mhm.
And you're already probably using it to do detection and response engineering anyway. You have a data science team that's looking for novel threats, novel TTPs, like IOCs. You already are doing that. It's sort of human based, but you're probably doing AI assisted looking through that pile of data anyway. So that those class of companies that are sort of that already have that stuff, I'm sure they're doing it. The more interesting, but they're limited because they only have, like, if you're an EDR company, you're not getting necessarily network telemetry. And if you're a network,
Mhm.
if you make firewalls, you're maybe not getting endpoint or email or cloud identity or other authentication alerts necessarily. I mean, some of your larger ones, like, again, like Palo, probably do have some of that. For companies that are shaped more like MDR, like us, who are we're tool agnostic, or some of the other folks that are like MSSPs that are servicing this, like, their data sets are interesting because they actually see multiple security tools. And I think there's two flavors of that. One is like, service providers like us, but also large enterprises that have their own internal SOCs. They have a bunch of this data and they may have some of their own analysts. And I think the question in those 30 companies that you were talking about at the top of this
Mhm.
conversation, like, they're going after that market and saying, like, look, I can come in and watch your SOC analyst and look at your data, and I will give you a very bespoke, like, optimized SOC experience for your environment. And I think that's where the it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out, if it's enough data. Like, can it
Mhm.
actually make economically viable results for folks?
And my other concern here is, a lot of the results, a lot of people commented, the output you get is somewhat mediocre. It sounds kind of like marketing speak and things like that, and which makes sense to me because, we're not really, when we grab this training data, we're not really qualifying it for like the actual quality of it. We're not filtering out bad quality stuff. Like, when we pull in, any of those question and answer sites, we get all the wrong answers and the right answers, right? So I'm wondering, like, how do we even handle that? Do we need some way to mark good versus bad answers? Good versus bad detections? Because maybe somebody's written some detections that don't detect. Like, there's an issue in there. or maybe it over detects, right? And it results in something really noisy that's not something that we want to build more of. So that's one of those spaces where I'm not sure I really understand how we solve that problem, how we solve the put glue on my pizza to make the cheese, prevent the cheese from sliding off, which is this weird edge case where one person on Reddit said that as a joke, and now it spits it out. And people are, constantly on the internet trolling the training data. Like iFixit keeps getting hit by Anthropic and other organizations who don't have permission to do it. So they've been trolling them. That like they've got a tutorial on how to remove a something from an orange, like how to
Hmm.
how to remove the hard drive from an orange or something like that. So now you can ask any of them how to remove the hard drive from an orange, and they'll give you that data that iFixit trolled them with.
That's amazing. Often, how like LinkedIn asks you to like opine in on some expertise, and they're just training that.
Yeah,
I resist the urge weekly to not just do some prompt injection or like put some like absolutely ridiculous response in there to poison their data. But it's a good point from a security detection engineering perspective. I mean, that's a problem you have whether you use AI or not, is detection efficacy. We actually pay attention a lot to it because it's a cost thing for us. Like noisy detections equals more time for SOC analysts going and investigating missing things, obviously very bad. So we try not to ever cross that line. And those are people. Like it's a decision support problem, as opposed to like the did the AI get it right is one thing when you're talking about glue on a pizza. Like who's gonna
right.
know? Like, did the AI get it right? Did you get
People have
breached? Oh,
tried
I
it
guess
now
you'll read
because
about
of that.
that.
Yeah, people have
Well,
actually
right, but
tried
like
it.
you don't want that. Awesome, maybe. I don't really want to try pizza glue for my security environment. That seems like a short-lived stint as a CISO.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's some good points there about where those wins are, the pattern matching for sure. Anywhere where there's a lot of data crunching, a lot of text crunching, summarization seems like the no-brainer thing to use generative AI for. When there's just too much text to go through, it can give you a nice summary. But also traditional, well, now we think of it as traditional just because it came before, but ML, is also very useful here, right? There's a lot of use for that in SOCs as well. I understand.
Absolutely. I mean, like my company's products have been using ML like training for years now, and it for that specific thing, right? It's like, can you show me a pattern? Can you show me a variance of a pattern that is within a certain tolerance based on data that I've seen at other customers? Can I apply it to you? I mean, that's like sort of bread and butter. Like all MDRs really do that, and so that is that's a very important use of that technology. I want to be like careful about the terms there because generative AI is more about like especially large language models, or more about like how distance between thing like how likely two things are to be near each other, and that's how it,
Right.
it understands language. So there is some value to that, but I mean, like to your point earlier, these models, a lot of them were trained on the internet, and like we've all seen the madness of Reddit. So
Yeah.
the like how specific to security you can overlay data onto the models and get some of the same stuff, but a true dyed in the wool, like trained only on security data, very well labeled, only like with known good and known bad, like those models don't really exist yet. And so the ML part of it is like decision support for analysts working on stuff, and I truly believe you could optimize like a good part of the low end of SOCs out, but the LLM part, I'm not sure does that. I think it does something else later, and we're still learning about that.
Right. Right. Um, yeah. And so, I'm not as concerned about hallucinations in this use case. In a SecOps use case, I think one of the first things people started to do to battle hallucinations was grounding data, was to fine tuning data, give it access to more stuff so that it doesn't find itself in a position where it needs to hallucinate. So, but then like I haven't seen a lot of this stuff in use. I think all those companies I mentioned are all seed stage, Series A. We haven't seen true market, any level of market saturation where we get the wild stories back yet. So haven't heard any of those yet. I'm sure they're coming. I'm probably wrong. Maybe there are some weird hallucinations out there.
Yeah, I think my main concern about the hallucinations are going to be, let's just say you're training a model from the ground up and you're doing it in an enterprise, like a big one that has like a fairly robust SOC already and has, fairly good, tools and everything's tuned right, and you have some decent detection engineering. So like that's a lot of predicates to even start the conversation with. Is like, having a good detection engineering function inside of a SOC is like that's a pretty high bar. And so let's say you have that. Who is going to be the people that know when you miss? Because if you're protecting an enterprise, like misses are we got breached, or there like you don't necessarily know about the false negatives in your environment, and that's a super important part of the labeling. Is like, oh well, we missed a thing. It turns out something stopped it. Some other control stopped it, but this detection didn't. And so we use that, like, obviously to refine our detection engineering because we see a lot of different stuff. But like I wonder, like, if these folks are going to have to train both sides of it, because otherwise the model might hallucinate like, oh, everything's fine, or it might hallucinate like, oh, that looks bad because I've detected badness before, but the attackers don't work that way anymore, and now you're back to generating noise for the SOC, and that's the part where it sort of remains to be seen. Super smart people are working at it. I've probably, I've probably seen 20 pitches on different companies trying to solve this different ways, and I think some of it's doable, but like it's early.
I that's a really good point talking about both sides of it, because I think that's the key with a lot of the security tools. Like I've done a lot of tool testing, a lot of due diligence on security products, and that seems to be one of the places I see the engineering teams behind these products fall down. Is there's no kind of sanity checks, like let's simulate an actual attack and see if it does all the things we expect it to do. And in many cases it misses very basic stuff, and all I can think is that these folks are not running those kinds of simulations, those kinds of tests, those sanity checks to make sure that
Or if they
yeah,
are,
we can detect.
yeah, or if they are, they're only detecting the actual full attack path in a lot of cases. Like, oh yeah, this is a thing that was actually an exploit. But like, what about one that was stopped halfway through, or one about, or prevented by some other control, but there was still an attempt, and those are the ones that are harder. Like, do you want to alert on that? Do you want to talk? Do
Right.
you want to talk? You want to understand how you could tune the other controls that are upstream? Like, there's a this is a difficult problem domain. I think in some like massively far out future state where you watch a bunch of very sophisticated SOC analysts and you had like, all of CrowdStrike and Palo Alto's data, you could probably train something to do that and you would have enough data to do it. I just wonder if the average enterprise, even the Fortune 50, actually has enough data to do it.
Right. um So yeah, it sounds like at this point, this is something where we're gonna have to babysit it quite a bit. Anytime we introduce any of this new stuff, we need a human in the loop, and we need to make sure that the output is what we expect, and kind of keep track of these, the weird edge cases that come up, or maybe they're not edge cases. Maybe we have some weird artifacts that are the norm. And I'm very interested, like the research, the academic community right now is building tons of custom LLMs, and I don't think we're there yet, from what I've seen. I don't know if any of these startups have the funding to do custom ones, but I'd be very interested to see what it looks like when we start seeing custom cybersecurity large language models.
Me too. Because even if they're not perfect, there's like an efficiency argument to be made here. It's like, if you can help me, like, even if it's not perfect, even if it's 80 to 90%, and I have to have somebody babysit the LLM, is it still good enough for me to like alter the composition of my SOC and have more tier two and tier three people, and repurpose the tier one people to do something else? Like, is there a like there can still be a good security outcome and a security win from like a not perfect product. It just going to have to be, like you said, very carefully babysitted to make sure that it's not hallucinating.
Mhm.
And I think the question I would have is much like with SOARs. Like the idea of SOAR is excellent, but it turns out you need an engineer to write to manage SOAR, and it turns
Yep.
out those people are basically DNR engineers.
Right.
And I just wonder, like, if when it comes time to like the person who's going to babysit this LLM to make sure, is that like a high end data science hire? Is that
Yeah.
or is that somebody who can is this, like a very senior security operations person, or can like could I manage that? Could I manage to see that LLM and understand like whether it's doing the right thing or not? And then it makes some business sense, or it alters the composition of the SOC at that point. I think that's probably the midterm question about it, is like is it efficient enough to
Mhm.
to drive value such that people will buy it?
I think you hit a nail on the head there too, because like the only time I've seen people happy about a sim is when they have dedicated full-time sim developers. Folks dedicated just to building the detections, the automations, the reports, making sure it all works. Um, yeah, so it seems like every time we enter one of these new eras, like the marketing tagline is, "Oh, it's going to save you so much labor," when in reality, like now you need additional people to babysit this thing and to tune it and to that understand how it works and can flip the switches and make it work better.
Yeah, and I think the problem with Source specifically was like you actually need a more expensive resource
Hmm.
to operate that thing effectively than you would have. You probably like how much more expensive is like a high end security engineer who has Python experience and can write code inside of a DNR platform relative to a handful of SOC analysts. I mean, I think it's probably close. It depends on where you live. So those are like the I mean, I don't even know what like ML engineers go for
Right.
right now in term on, but
Yeah.
I'm guessing they're not available in general, right?
Right, right. If you can even find them, yeah. Like data science, most of the data scientists I see getting pulled into cybersecurity, this is their first uh, entrance into cybersecurity. Like finding somebody with both who's a data scientist and has cybersecurity experience is still a bit of a unicorn.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I mean that'll change over the next 5 years, but for now, sure.
So on the attacker side, we keep talking about the quality of the training data and why wouldn't you put uh, you know prompt injections into stuff? Like, is this going to be a field day for attackers, knowing that we're using LMs and knowing how we're training on the data? Can they just poison it at will?
Well, they won't. That'll be later. I heard. I think it was Dan Guido say at one point. He's like, "Well, this like LLMs and generative AI are going to favor the attackers very much in the short term,
Mhm.
and then in the long term, it'll favor the defenders." I think the attackers have far better things to do than poison defender
Sure.
LLMs with their LLMs, like generating phishing, like forging video for identity. Really good spam for in all sorts of different languages, the ability to synthesize attacks from like GitHub repos, like, oh, just make it just a little bit different so it's not detected. And I think there'll be a period of like sort of bot on bot action where like the attacking LLMs will move things around just enough to evade the detection of the detection LLMs. And I think you'll see that sort of arms race for a while in the medium term. And then I think you'll see what you're talking about, which is like, oh, they're going to try to poison all the training set via the
Mhm.
security controls so that their next attack will work. But they've got much more low hanging fruit in the short to medium term, I think.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I totally expect to start seeing prompt injections in phishing emails. So I've already seen people doing it on LinkedIn to mess with recruiters. So
Yeah, I read an article about that too, where they were like, "Oh, well, I bypassed their ATS by putting this in there," and I'm like, "And the ATS is going to start looking for this kind of stuff." I'm like, "Oh man!" So like, we're back to the only way to apply for a job is to know somebody, because you've got LLMs fighting over whose resumes are actually going to get looked at. Like this, like here we broke it. The internet broke it for everyone. Awesome.
yep, and we have a few stories about that in the news segment where where it's turned into a full-on battle, like who's allowed to scrape who, and yeah, it's a mess. Yep. All right. Excellent stuff, Greg. Thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. I think a very timely and topical topic to talk about.
Thank you for having me.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to continue the conversation on same topic, very similar topic, with Edward Wu from Drop Zone.